And we're live, and welcome to this episode of Cars and Popcorn. Today we are talking about Rush, we're talking movies, we're talking life, we're talking a whole lot of crazy shit. Wait, wrong intro. But a good segue to our guest today, who is DeVaughn Taylor, aka Deezus from Deezus Take the Reel. How you doing, DeVaughn?
I love that so much. I was like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. But no, you killed it on the intro, man. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. This is literally one of my favorite movies, like top 10. So this could be a good time.
And joining us today for the second time, he's a big car nerd. He's a fellow engineer all the way in Kentucky. We built a race car together. Writer for MotoIQ. It's David. I will call him Curly Zipf. David, how you doing?
I'm doing great. What's my name? Say my name.
Your name is Curly. That was the one David you're going to get for this episode.
Well, no, you gave me two. That's twice as many as last time.
Damn, I'm losing it. Anyway.
It's because I tricked you. But yes, Rush is a wonderful movie. It is a movie about something I really love, which is car racing in general, but I have a particular soft spot for Formula One. So I got brought in basically just to be the car nerd to balance out the movie nerds. And yes, I think one of me can balance out the two of you.
Fair enough. I feel like I'm kind of the tweener here anyway, so I feel like we have a nice balance in the force right now. So
I feel like
DeVaughn,
we're pretty even.
So let's get right into it. So DeVaughn, you brought this movie in here, so I start off with the usual two questions with this show. It's what made you request this movie, and what was your favorite car from the movie?
So what made me pick this movie is, so we were talking beforehand, like I'm very car ignorant. Like I don't know much about cars. I don't do anything on my own car. Everybody does everything for me. I'm like, I don't know cars. And I'm also not a big racing person. I've never been a big NASCAR fan. I do like, I like indie stuff. I like Formula One. I think that's fairly entertaining, but like, I've never been like a big racing fan in general. So that's why like, whenever I saw this movie for the first time, it just like blew my mind. Cause one, I was like, if a movie can make me like enjoy like watching the racing and the behind the scenes stuff, then it gets a plus there. But then also like, cause I'm a lot of people don't realize, cause I'm such a movie nerd and I'm like, a little flamboyant and stuff. I'm a big sports guy. I played sports all through high school, and so like the rivalry aspect is really what got me. Is like, and this rivalry in particular, we'll get into more of it when we actually talk the movie, but just something about this rivalry really stood out to me. And then like whenever I started doing research behind and see the real life story and stuff, it's very fascinating. Just everything about this story, from the acting, the direction, the racing, everything is just, I absolutely love this film, and I watch it a lot. Like that's a big thing too. I watch this movie for some reason, like a lot. I put it on the background, like while I edit stuff. It's just, I love this movie. I don't know why. Oh, and then the second question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tom.
It's just what I really like to hear when I talk about this movie, because every time I recommend it to someone, it's like the first thing I say. I'm like, you don't need to know cars, you don't need to love racing. It's just a really good movie with a really good character story. So I'm going to let you continue with your favorite car from the movie.
Yeah, no, exactly like you said. You don't really need the car and racing background for this, and it's great. Favorite car? I mean, it's kind of hard to say, because it's mostly all the same cars since we're dealing with Formula One. So I'll go with my funny answer, which is the little Italian thing that the fans drove, that they wanted Niki Lauda to drive so bad. Just because it's funny, this super famous Formula One race car driver driving this little rinky-dink car super fast and stuff and weaving through traffic. So that gets my pick for favorite car. I mean, he made that car look awesome.
As any amazing race car driver will do.
Exactly. Like it's like the car doesn't even matter. It's the driver.
And it's a wonderful scene because it really shows you, the talent and the the abilities of Niki Lauda, because up until that point in the movie, you sort of hear about it. You find out that he's an engineer and he's really nerdy. This is the first time you see that raw talent. You go, oh man, he actually might be a foil for this flamboyant, hard partying British guy who's just kicking ass everywhere.
And here we show the car, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Curly, I believe it's either a Lancia or a Lada, but it's just this ridiculously crappy car that they pick up after her Peugeot just dies on the side of the road, and they kind of goad him in.
It's either Lancia or an Alpha, and I don't know enough about old
It's definitely
Italian.
not an Alpha, so it's a Lancia.
Okay.
So it's gotta be a Lancia.
As I don't know enough about old Italian. I mean, it could even be a Fiat. It's an old crappy Italian sedan, and to put it into context today, that would be like buying a Crown Victoria, a police interceptor Crown Victoria that's been used and abused, like a taxi cab. Actually, like buying a used taxi cab. That's basically what this thing is. And Niki Lauda turns it into a race car just by sitting behind the wheel.
But particularly this scene was really interesting. Is this was one of the first times you actually learned the kind of person that Niki Lauda was. He's just driving this thing around like a grandma. The girl doesn't believe that he's a Formula One driver because he's not flamboyant or hot or just your normal F1 stereotype. And so they're like, oh yeah, this is Niki Lauda. She's like, she goats him into driving fast with her basically female charms, and that's when we see Niki Lauda the man.
It literally is one. It might be like it's top 3 favorite scenes of that movie, but like even like you just said, like in that little 5-minute scene and the conversation, you learn so much about her and about Nikki, and you see the connection between the two of them. It's such a great scene. Like literally, I quote it sometimes. Like I'll be watching, and then she's like, hey, he goes through his spiel and he goes, "Why would I drive fast if I don't need to?" And she literally just says, "Because I asked you to." And that's all he needs. And he goes, oh, and then he in German goes, "Do you always get what you want?" And then that's whenever he just takes off. And I'm like, yes, like that. It's a great scene.
It is absolutely fantastic.
His romantic interest who becomes his wife. If anything, she is asking the question that everybody in the audience is asking.
Yeah, I love it. She even calls him out too. She's like, she goes, "You're driving like a grandma. Are you sure you're a Formula One driver? Like you don't have the hair." And like that's another thing. Like I love, Tom said it too. Touching on how he's not the stereotypical F1 driver. It's a great scene.
It really isn't just him throwing this crappy Lancia around the streets of Italy. Awesome. So let's move on to Curly. So I know you'll probably have an interesting pick, and I'm kind of throwing this on you. But what was your favorite car from the movie?
Well, if I was gonna go with the modern teams I enjoy, it would have to be the McLaren M23 because I am a big McLaren fan, as Tom very well knows. But I feel like I have to go a little bit weirder, and I'm going to go with the Penske PC4 because, number one, I'm a big fan of Penske, and I'll be rooting for all 4 of the Penske drivers who are running in the IndyCar race later this afternoon. But I love it specifically because it was the last American, labeled car. I forget exactly what the term they used because it wasn't built in America. It was built in England. But Penske was an American team. And it was the last time an American team or an American Formula One car won in Formula One, and that was 41 years ago, which is just an insane gap. And I'd have to go with a very close second for Parnelli Jones's car, which doesn't actually appear in the movie. It only raced 2 races in 1976, but it was the last time you had an American team, there's the Penske, and you actually do have the Parnelli later. But the Parnelli is the last time you had an American team, an American driver who's Mario Andretti, he's a naturalized American, not a born American, but he's close enough. And more importantly, that car was built and designed in America, so it ticked all 3 boxes. And it didn't win a race, sadly, because Parnelli couldn't participate in Formula One long enough for it to win a race. But again, 41 years, and it was the last time we had a full American team in Formula One. And the only other time we've had it before then was Dan Gurney, and that was in the 60s, and we haven't had anything like that since. So, America.
USA.
USA.
I totally forgot, though, because I thought you were describing this other car, but like another close second for me. What is the car that has 6 wheels randomly? It pops up like twice in the movie, and it has
the Terrell
6 wheels.
P34.
Yeah, it looks like a purple like Batmobile. That's what Batman would drive if he was an F1 racer. That thing's cool, and everybody's always like, "Who's driving that car?" Yeah, those.
You wouldn't spoil my favorite car from this movie because it was the weird 6-wheeled Tyrell. Which how you pronounce it, Curly?
Tyrrell. It's Tyrrell. Yeah, Tyrrell. Yeah, and that's just it's one of those things where the solution they came up with. So the problem was the rules in Formula One mandated how wide the front wing could be, and it was like 1.5 meters or something like that. But the track width of the cars could be wider than the front wing. Well, no one's going to give up their track width to keep it behind the wing. Basically, when you have the tire hanging out, it creates drag. So everybody made their front tires wider than the front wing because they wanted the extra grip. So the solution that Tyrrell came up with was, instead of having one big fat front tire, let's have 2 small ones, put them behind each other, and then we can make the track of the car as narrow as the front wing so we have less drag. But because we have the extra tires, we get the same amount of grip. And it worked because it won a race. And it not only won a race, it finished 1-2 at the Austrian Grand Prix in 1976. And you're showing Jody Scheckter. He called the car a piece of crap. He hated the thing. But he won the race in it, which is really funny. He ended up leaving the team after that year. And they wanted to keep it going because it did work, but Goodyear didn't want to make the tires for it anymore, so they had to give up the idea. But it was...
They also make a regulation change to stop the 6-wheel car?
I think they did that later on. They did that later on because I know Williams and Ferrari both tested 6-wheeled cars, but Williams had 2 rear axles, and the Ferrari, the rear axle was like a dually. It had 2 rear tires next to each other.
Is it still front? Is it front wheel steering or is it rear now with those ones? Do all 4 of them steer, or?
Yeah, all 4 of them did steer, and they had to come up with this really funky steering mechanism to make it all work. And you can dig online on YouTube, and there's a video of I want to say it's Jackie Stewart, but there was someone testing the car and they didn't have that front bodywork on it, so you can see the whole steering mechanism work. And the unveil is one of those neat stories in racing where they unveiled the car and they had it all covered up, but they had these big hoops on the front axle to make it look like it had 4 tires. So they pull the cover off and everyone's like, what the hell is this thing? They said, it's a 6-wheel race car. And everybody seeing that said, bullshit. Nobody thought it was a real car. And then they are, all right, we'll prove you wrong. And then they went out and drove it, and they raced 2 seasons with the thing.
Like I said, it literally looks like Batman's F1 car. Like, I wouldn't believe if I saw it either, because like I said, it literally looks like that's what Batman would drive.
And that's why I love this period of racing, because the rules were open enough that you could do something like that. And at that point, the FIA, who was called Deezus, who ran Formula One, they weren't ban happy. Like, if someone did that today, it wouldn't even make it out of the pit lane. They'd say, no, you're not allowed to drive that at all. But Formula One at the time's like, yeah, drive it. And they drove it for 2 seasons. And again, they only stopped driving it because they couldn't get tires for it anymore. So it was just a really unique period in Formula One, and this movie is smack in the middle of it.
And the fact that it worked too was just hilarious, because I believe that finished 3rd in the constructors behind Ferrari and McLaren that year.
It did. It did. They started the season with the 007, which was their conventional car, and it was the Spanish race, the 4th race. They introduced the P34, and the 007 scored like 2 points, but out of that team scored 71 points, and almost all those were from the P34. And you're right, they did finish 3rd in the championship, a distant 3rd to McLaren and Ferrari. Yeah, maybe that'll be Rush 2's story of the P34.
I would love a movie about this, about the six-wheeled car. That would be amazing. But before we move on at all, I do have to talk about one more car, and you're seeing it now. It's Hunt's Mini, because I love the classic Mini.
I like them too. I think they're really cool. This kind of reminds me of like the original Italian Job with everybody in the minis. Well, and then the new one they like all use the updated minis. But no, that's a cool little car.
And I hope it's
rally.
intentional. James Hunt started his racing career racing Mini Coopers.
Really?
Yeah, his very
Rally
first. No, it was a touring car thing. It was kind of like I forget the name of the series. But it was basically like Spec Miata. You buy a Mini Cooper, you throw a roll cage in it, and then you go racing. And
So-
I don't know if that was a intentional homage to that, but his very first season of racing was Mini Coopers. Then he did Formula 3, Formula 2, and then Formula 1.
I mean, it's gotta be. This movie was so well researched. I feel like it's an Easter egg.
Yeah, and that-
definitely is, because you can tell by just looking at the car with those flared fender arches and the larger tires. That's got to be a race car. So that
Yeah, plus
makes a
it's
lot
got
more
that
sense now.
that big white circle on the door for a number.
Yep.
Yeah, and actually that whole scene, it's not historically accurate for a number of reasons. But what it does is it condenses both Lauda's and Hunt's pre-Formula One careers into one quick and easy scene. And again, part of it is the fact that you've got his Mini Cooper, Hunt's Mini Cooper, and then Hunt did do, I think, 2 seasons in Formula 3. He did a season in Formula 2 with Hesketh, which they show, but they say it's Formula 3. He was actually in Formula 2 with Hesketh. That was 1973, and then in 74 they went to Formula 1. So it all sort of condenses, 3 or 4 years, or I think it was 4 seasons into one scene, and does sort of set the stage. And Hunt and Lauda did race against each other in F2, not in F3, but in F2.
And I guess that kind of makes sense to kind of deviate from the factual story in order to kind of get that condensed backstory.
Mm-hmm.
The whole movie is supposed to be about their rivalry of the 76 season, and you have to set that up in some way, but you can't spend half the movie setting it up and then you only get the rivalry for an hour. Instead, we got go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, you're good, Tom.
Yeah, so instead of condensing the rivalry part into just the second half, you're condensing the backstory. Make sure you get a nice, clean. It was fairly clean and well done backstory, and then go right into the rivalry.
Yeah, it's like I'm looking at like some of the historical inaccuracies and stuff that they did. I mean, it's like they did like minor changes, like certain people placing at different times, like especially with like to keep Regazzoni in there a little bit more. They like kind of changed like some of the places he came in on a couple of the races, and then like stuff like that. But I like that they made that change, because the pacing in this movie is like impeccably well. Like from getting the backstory to their rivalry. The crash happens at the perfect point. You get the recovery. Like I feel like every era that they were trying to hit definitely got their due. Like that's another big thing for this movie is I think for it's a little bit under 2 hours, but it is like very well paced.
Yeah, and as the sort of historical nerd here, I can totally give that scene a pass, because you're right. It's 4 seasons condensed into one scene and sets up the whole rest of the movie. So as a storytelling device, it's needed, but then again, there are neat little Easter eggs like the Mini, or the crash between Hunt and Lauda. It didn't happen between Hunt and Lauda, but it happened between Hunt and another driver. And James Hunt actually did a NASCAR style fight and actually punched the dude and threw him to the ground. And the funniest thing about that is he is not the one who got a penalty. The other driver got a 12-month suspension on his racing license for it.
See, that's something I would have liked thrown in there. Like, there's a couple things that they left out. Like, apparently they like Lauda and Hunt like lived together for a little bit in their early career, which I think that would have been like super interesting. But can only fit so much in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that would have been really fun. The two of them like battling it out on the track, and they're like, so who's buying dinner tonight?
They should have did it in like flashbacks, like when they lived together. I think that would have been interesting.
It's a Hunt and Lauda odd couple movie.
There you
It
go.
really is.
It would definitely change the tone of the film.
Just those. What?
It would have definitely changed the tone of the film if they'd done it that way.
I don't think it would have did too much, but see, I could watch this story and movie for like 3.5 hours. So like that's my thing. Like I could literally like watch the entire like extended, like let's take it through 10 years of these two. Like I would watch that. I'd watch all of it.
We don't even have to go 10 years to that because their rivalry only really lasted from 75 to 77, but I mean there's so much in 1976 that they did not cover in that movie. And I mean, the biggest thing was, they showed Hunt being disqualified in Spain and then reinstated. He got disqualified again at the British Grand Prix after he won it, and that was a huge deal. Mostly because he got disqualified at his home race and the circumstances behind it, and it was such a sore subject that Enzo Ferrari did not bring any Ferraris to the Austrian Grand Prix. Now that race was right after the German Grand Prix where Lauda had his accident, and there's a dispute on did he not bring the Ferraris because his main driver was in the hospital at that point, could very well not survive, or was he playing a political game with Formula One and saying I'm not going to go to this race because you guys can't manage your own races?
The answer is probably yes.
I'm sure it was a bit of both. I'm sure it was a bit of both, but again, that if there's an extended cut out there somewhere, I hope they talk about that because that was a really important turning point in the season. Because the two
not an extended cut.
Ebb and flow of the Lauda's doing well and then Hunt does really well and then they just go back and forth and they sort of show some of that in the movie, but if I was to make a change, I'd like to see more of that ebb and flow where one's the underdog and one's the top dog, and it goes back and forth.
Right, but I mean, obviously they had to skip to. Ultimately, we got to talk about the crash because that took up a significant part of the film, and it was a significant part of that season. And so, I think Curly and I are going to have to nerd out a little bit about the Nürburgring.
Of course,
there were a lot of safety. There are a lot of safety things that came out of this. The biggest being that they didn't go back to the Nürburgring full course after this event, and a lot of it was partly because in the event of that Lauda accident, at that time it was a 14-mile circuit. It's massive, and they just didn't have the capabilities to not only put that on TV, which was becoming more popular, but for safety. It was really difficult for the safety teams to be able to get out to any sort of accident that happened, which is part of why it was bad as they were. I believe drivers really did have to help get him out of that car since the safety crew couldn't get there quick enough.
Yeah, and
that's completely true. They said because Lauda was trapped in the car for a minute, and that was with 3 or 4 drivers trying to help him out. They got him out of the car, and the safety crews didn't show up for another couple of minutes. He would have absolutely burned to death in that car if nobody had stopped to help him. And that's why the drivers stopped, because they all knew, where he was, or just in general at that track, there was a good chance there wasn't a safety crew nearby. They had one fire extinguisher to put out that whole car, which of course they couldn't do. They had to put out the fire directly around him so they could get him out of that car. And one of the reasons it took so long was the seatbelts that Ferrari used. They used their own special latch, and I don't know what was different about it. It was Italian, so maybe it just didn't like opening or working or whatever. But nobody could get it open, and of course, Lauda's trying not to burn to death, so he couldn't do it. I don't remember who the driver was, but one of the drivers stopped, and he had driven a Ferrari, and he knew how to work the belts, and he was the one who actually got Lauda out of the car.
Yeah.
I also want to add one more fact about that. He did not lose his helmet in that crash. And if anything, it was actually all the burns on the top of his head were from his helmet melting to his forehead. So he did not lose his helmet. And if anything, it almost would have been better if he had, but the majority of the burns are caused by the inside of his helmet, which they weren't really flame retardant at the time. All that foam and plastic was starting to melt, and burning plastic is one of the worst things to have stick to you. So that's really where the source of most of his injuries came from.
Yeah, and from a movie standpoint, like it's a great scene too, because like they really did a good job of like because like you said, like this is like the crucial, like kind of like the tipping point of the movie, you know, and they did a really good job of not only like, you know, they did kind of amp up the dramatics a little bit because, you know, of course it's a movie, but like like even like you said, like, you know, Lauda was burning for a minute, and I like that they even like in the movie, like it wasn't like they like rescued him immediately. Like they let you like watch it happen, and like that kind of even like made you feel for Lauda a little bit more as well, because you're literally watching him and he's just sitting, and like everybody's doing, you know, what they can. So it's like the you know, implication of that scene. I think they did a very good job of it. You know, we've talked about things that they cut out and everything, but I think at the same time they did such a good job with like the very important key moments that people were waiting and looking for, to like really make sure that they stood out and like, hey, this is like a big moment. And so like they did that with the opening scenes, and then the crash, the scene. I'm curious to if you know anything about the scene where they did the voting in the background, when, you know, Hunt kind of got everybody against Lauda. I thought that was an interesting scene as well. So you know, they did cut corners, you know, because we're talking racing. They did cut corners a little bit, but I think they did a very good job at hitting like all the important stuff, though, for sure.
Yeah, and to tell you just how well of a job, or how good of a job they did with that scene, right after the crash, when they're doing the newsreel and they're talking about drivers who've died, and James Hunt's watching TV, the footage of Lauda's crash is not movie footage. That's the actual TV footage from the accident. There happened to be a camera there. That. Yeah, so they're discussing all the drivers who died in the 70s, and every one of those crashes was a real crash. And now when you watch that, it's going to be a little bit morbid because you are watching the footage of an actual person dying, except for Niki Lauda. But all of those were real accidents and real accident footage. And so again, it shows just how good a job they did of reenacting that scene, because it is pretty much identical.
Yeah,
of course,
I think it's also
video to work off of.
I think it's also great because one theme that they really played up in the movie was how dangerous racing is. And I like that. I think that also kind of helped as well, like in the framing of the crash, and then him watch on the news and like them talk about all the drivers. Like that's something they do point out a lot. I mean, the first time we're introduced to Hunt, he's getting checked into a hospital. So it's like there's that. And then he's going through his monologue about being close to death. And that's like another really interesting aspect that stood out to me of, you know, the why do we do this, you know, if it's so dangerous, you know, and all the things like that. I think that's a really interesting aspect of the movie too.
I mean, the first line of the movie is, I'm going to try to do my Niki Lauda. Every year, 20 racing drivers enter Formula One. 2 of us die. He was right.
That was pretty good.
That was Russian, dude.
His Austria and Russia were kind of they're a little close there, but it was really true. In Formula One, at that time, the average in Formula One was about 1 a year. And in IndyCar, it was about the same. NASCAR, Tom probably knows better than me, but you know, the injury and fatality rate there was big. And it wasn't just the fatalities, you know, the pre-race accident at the ring, which that accident did not happen. It was a very common type of accident. Is, first of all, the car going over the wall. That happened a lot. And the leg injuries, those were the biggest injury to a driver. That was the you know, that was the way you were going to lose your career, was breaking your legs or mangling your legs. Or
and from a storytelling aspect, the other reason they kind of set that up was really interesting scene with the Watkins Glen incident, I believe. And it was a practice session where I'm not sure 100% if that actually happened, but driver spun off, got decapitated, went under the guardrail, and that was another thing because Formula One cars sit so low to the ground. But that did a couple things, which it kind of, I just realized in a recent watch, they kind of set up the whole James Hunt vomiting thing, because when he saw that moment of the guy decapitated, he did go to vomit. And you can kind of connect that with some of the other scenes in the film where he would be vomiting before races. It's kind of a cue to me that they set up that Hunt, like everyone else, was afraid to die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as much as he, you know, tried to say he wasn't afraid of death, he really was. that so that particular scene is again a mashup. The accident where a driver lost his head, that actually happened. That was 1974, and the driver was Helmuth Koenig, and it was in the S's. It was this right-left, this really fast section of the track that you almost took flat out. He clipped the curbs wrong, bounced off one side of the track, and then shot straight across to the other. And when he hit the barriers head on, and that crash, the way that he went through the barrier is spot on. He went under the barrier, and it ripped the whole top of the car off, including the top of him. But 1973, another driver died at Watkins Glen in the same corner. That was Francois Severet. And that's the car that they show. It was an Elf Tyrrell, and you can actually see on the back wing it says Elf. And it was the correct number, which was either number 6 or number 9. He crashed in the same way, but instead of going under the barrier, he actually caught the top of the barrier, and it ripped the front of the car off and did just massive trauma to the front of his body. And what was so tragic about that accident was Jackie Stewart was his teammate. He had just won his 3rd world championship, and he was prepared to announce he was going to retire after that race. It was the last race of the season. And he was going to hand over the team to Severet. And then Severet dies at this race. He retired on the spot. And for Jackie, it was one of his worst moments as a driver, because he had trained Severet to be his protege and had lost him in such an awful, awful way. And it was, the mood of that accident is very well kept in Rush. Even though the accident itself isn't the same, how that affected the field. And there's actually, there's not footage of the crash, but they were filming a film on Jackie. And there's a scene where Colin Chapman, they tell Colin, he says, "Oh, what happened?" He was in qualifying. He says, "What happened?" He says, "Oh, it's severing." Oh my God. Because everyone knew how bad it was. And again, it's very well kept in the film, just how jarring and shocking and heart-wrenching that accident was.
Yep. And before we move on or at all, I did want to stop and kind of mention about the production of the film. That for a lot of these scenes, most of them were filmed at either Brands Hatch or an airport. The Nürburgring footage was filmed at the ring. That was a really difficult thing to fake, and a lot of the racing scenes were actually done with authentic race cars from that era. Ron Howard was lucky enough to show up at a historical F1 race, and after their race, he kind of asked the drivers, "Hey, would you mind if we filmed some of your cars?" And they're like, "Okay, we have two deals, or we have 2 demands. 1, we have to drive them, naturally. 2, could our wives or girlfriends be in the movie?" So a lot of the things you see in the background are like the girlfriends and wives of these historical F1 drivers. And just for like a scale, one of Hunt's McLarens sold for 1.2 million a couple years ago. So they were driving around doing these scenes in $1.2 million cars that Howard actually had to rein them back a few times because they were running really hard against each other, and they had to throw a few regulations down because these were not stuntmen, and Howard would have been in a lot of trouble if they hurt themselves.
Oh
yeah,
man,
he did not want a repeat of Steve McQueen's Le Mans, where don't remember the name of the driver, but he was paralyzed in a crash while filming for that movie. And
yeah, like that could have been a huge deal if somebody would have like got hurt during the filming of that or anything. I mean, I'm sure there were, documents and whatnot, but still, like that would have been just a huge thing if something were to happen. But as a big risk by Ron Howard, and I don't think he gets enough credit for the things that the links he went to like authenticate this movie and his direction in general. I don't think he gets enough credit for this movie. A lot of people forget it's Ron Howard for some reason.
That and the care they took with creating these replicas, they had to fill in the gaps with a few replica cars, and he made sure that to keep it to a minimum. Like with the hardcore racing scenes, they obviously had to create a Ferrari and a McLaren, but I think they only missed 2 or 3 cars in the field that were realistic, and that they had to replicate 2 or 3 of them. But they took care to make sure they were period accurate. A lot of them had V8 engines, not obviously Formula One engines. I think they were Rovers or something. But he did take care even to the replicas.
Oh yeah, because Formula One nerds would have just totally shred. I mean, you can look on the IMDb and how many complaints are about, oh, this van that appears was 2 model years too new. I mean, can you imagine what the Formula One geeks? I'm not an angry Formula One nerd, but the angry Formula One nerds, if they had seen a car that was not period correct, they would have totally boycotted the movie. Oh, this thing is completely inaccurate.
Yeah, I can imagine that F1 nerds are not as savage as DC or Marvel nerds. Maybe if that were the case, then yeah, this movie would have been picked apart by far by the nerds.
I would argue that because you DC Marvel fans, you guys will go to a movie and it's 2 hours long and you're generally not allowed to drink in the theater. Formula One race lasts from Thursday until Sunday, and some people will drink from Thursday to Sunday, being outdoors. So yeah, the fights can get pretty intense, especially if you go to Australia.
Always in Australia.
Yeah.
Where they famously limit the alcohol content to like a case for bathers. Fun fact.
Yeah, and then people will go out to the track in advance and bury beer underground, and then go to their campsite and dig up the beer again.
Oh wow.
Australian race fans are nuts.
Australians are nuts. I mean, let's be real.
They make NASCAR fans look like nuns.
Oh man. Can I do my Lauda impression at some point? Because I have to talk about my favorite line in the movie. So we should close. Can I do it now? Okay, so because we're totally at a random point here. So my favorite line in the movie, and it's a lot of people's favorite lines, I quote to people all the time, is the first time that Nicky drives one of the Ferraris, and he pulls into the stop. Okay, he pulls in a stop, and he goes, "It's a shit box," and then they go, "You can't say that," and he goes, "Well, why not?" And they go, "It's a Ferrari." And he goes, "It's a shit box." And they're like, and he just makes a face. He just goes, like that. And then that face that Daniel Bruhl makes cracks me up every time I see that film. So like, that's like literally my favorite quote ever. "It's a Ferrari." No, it's a shit box.
And it's true, because the cars then were friggin' terrible. Ferrari hadn't won a world championship since 1964, and their season was so bad in 73 they actually missed Formula One races because they basically couldn't afford, because they were doing sports cars and Formula One. They really couldn't afford to do both, and they were doing horribly in Formula One. And that was when they hired Luca Di Montezemolo. Yes, it's the 312 T2. You can tell it's the T2 because it's got the funny-looking snorkel intakes in front. In 1976, Formula One banned the giant air boxes that were over the top of the engines, and you see them at the beginning of the year. And they banned them because there was officially a rule about how tall the top of the car could be, and everyone really ignored it, and Formula One stopped caring, and then people started putting on air boxes that were as tall as the rest of the car, so they banned them. But the 312T was the car that was designed basically by Niki Lauda, and it was a huge improvement over the 312B, which is the car that he drove and said it was a shitbox, and it was a shitbox. And they went from not being able to complete the entire championship to winning the world championship in 2 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, people give crap to Ferrari right now because they haven't won a championship since 07. This was even worse than that.
That's like another reason, just showing how much of a badass Lauda is. Another thing, like, how did Daniel Bruhl not get nominated for this? How it got no Oscar nominations? Like, in 2013, this thing like went so far under the radar. It had a 89% on Rotten Tomatoes that year. It made money, and somehow like was even talked about in award season, especially like I said, Daniel Bruhl at least should have been nominated or at least like talked about. And like this movie got somehow no recognition that year. I mean, 2013 was a big year and lots of big name stuff. I mean, they could have thrown this thing.
But there were some gaps. There were some gaps in that.
I mean, they could have thrown them some production noms somewhere, the sound design as well. The sound design in this movie is excellent. Like between hearing the racers and the pit and the sounds and the crowd, the sound design is impeccable.
Fun fact, actually the first movie I watched on my new sound system. So there's a reason for that.
Yeah, so I don't get it.
You do not have to work very hard to make a Cosworth DFV sound really, really good. But it's kind of a cool thing about that era. You had only a handful of engines. You had the Cosworth DFV V8, which was in the McLaren and was in almost the entire rest of the field. Ferrari had their own engine. Alfa Romeo had an engine in the Brabham. BRM had an engine, and then the Ligier had a V12. They were all of those were V12s or flat 12s, and everybody else used a V8. And the V8 tended to be the better choice.
I think most of the field that year in '76 ran that Cosworth V8, if I researched correctly.
Yeah. Again, the Ferrari had their own engine, but they didn't sell it. Alfa Romeo put a flat 12 in the back of the Brabham, and that had been using a Cosworth engine. Ligier used the Matra V12, and they were both French companies, so that made sense. And then BRM was crazy, and they always made their own engines. And they made a V12, and everybody else used the Cosworth engine. And out of the, I think there were 24 or so teams that entered that year, and only 4 of them did not use the Cosworth engine. Because the Cosworth engine was dirt cheap. It was powerful, it was light, and, it was perfect for Formula One. And then, of course, teams like McLaren would take their engine and tune and tweak and play with it to make a little more power or make it a little bit lighter or whatever. But it was, Formula One in the 70s, you could plug and play. You bought a gearbox from Hewland, you bought an engine from Cosworth, you either designed a car that looked exactly like the Lotus 72, or you bought a car that was the Lotus 72 or like the Lotus 72. You put it all together and you went racing. Hesketh does it at the beginning of the movie. That's pretty much how teams went. They're like, all right, we get an engine, we get a transmission, we put a car around it, and let's go to do Formula One.
So just to shout out the chat a little bit here, so we got Tom on here with the fun fact that Ron Howard screen tested this with Formula drivers, fans, and engineers, and got a standing ovation. So a little fun fact there.
Huh? I really now I just want to wonder, like, is Ron Howard just like a big fan? Like, I love that. Like, I mean, I'm loving all this background, knowing how much research he did. Like, is he just a big fan? I guess. I don't know.
So we can transition into his Top Gear interview, which I have to pull up the car he drove. He spoke about the film in an interview, and he said specifically that classic racing he was very much into, and he was very much a fan of this rivalry, since you could tell this guy was a born storyteller, and he knew from this rivalry that it was something special. And so this went a long way back for him, and that he always wanted to do it. So yes, he was in fact a big fan of Lauda and Hunt in this rivalry, and Lauda, of course, was a huge part of creating this movie. And Ron and Lauda got a pretty decent relationship after that. And of course, I have to highlight the car that Ron Howard drove on Top Gear. He was on the Star in a reasonably priced car, which he did not do so well.
By the way, for anyone watching right now is when you can tune out, because that's the coolest car you're going to see all day.
Yes, that's Vauxhall Astra. Tech line with a lifetime warranty.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Not Hunt. Ron Howard was a really big Formula One fan, and he grew up in the 70s. That was sort of one of the childhood sports rivalry stories that he grew up with. I would have grown up in the Michael Schumacher versus the world era, Of course, I was born in 1988, which is the middle of Senna and Prost. And genuinely, if there's going to be a Rush 2, it's going to be about those two because they had almost an identical rivalry. But first of all, neither of them got really badly mangled in the middle of their rivalry seasons. But for a couple of seasons, they were teammates, so they were in exactly the same car. And it's again the same type of rivalry. Oh, it was a battle royale.
So
I would watch that. I think that'd be an interesting wrinkle with the drivers being on or on the same team. I think that would have been a really interesting wrinkle in the rivalry. But like touch on the rivalry like real quick is just like I said, that's what kind of drew me in because I've always been a sports guy. I played sports for my whole life: football, basketball, volleyball. But volleyball, I had a rival that went to a different school, but we saw each other at tournaments every time we play each other in games. Like I did have a rival for a minute, but it wasn't like this one because I was kind of a nasty sportsman at times. So it was not like this kind of rivalry. But that's what makes it stand out to me is because they did have this mutual respect, and they said that's even kind of downplayed. They say at one point they were actually really good friends. So it's like I do love how it's this mutual respect, or especially with Lauda's monologue to Hunt afterwards, telling him that he's equally as responsible for him getting back into the car as him being out of it. That's great. And then the last conversation we see them have at the airplane hangar as well, like you really saw like the respect that they had for each other, and that this was a point when rivalries were about making each other better. It wasn't about trying to make more money than your person, trying to always outdo them. Like, yeah, they were trying to outdo each other, but at the same time, they were trying to make each other better. Especially Lauda. Like, Lauda saw the potential in Hunt and wanted him to do better even, so I think that's even interesting too.
And just to tie this whole thing into a neat little bow as we're getting towards the end here, that airport scene is actually probably my favorite scene of that movie. And that's the point where you get Lauda trying to push Hunt to get back to work, to get back and get testing, and that's when you kind of see Hunt sort of satisfied with his place. Nicky, I get to do my Lauda impression now with my favorite line of the film, where they're talking about their rivalry and how they've grown a respect for each other. And he speaks my favorite line that let's see if I can do this here. A wise man gets more from his enemies than a fool from his friends.
That's actually pretty good. I think you win the best impression of this episode because that one's actually pretty solid. But no, I mean, it's great. And like literally how he's like, he's trying, like you say, he's trying to get James to go back into testing. He's just like, I need you out there busting my balls. Cause like you said, like Nicky said, you make me better. But it also, showed the difference how Nicky saw the big picture versus Hunt. He wanted his win. He got his win, beat Nicky on his own terms and all that jazz. So it was like, like you said, Hunt was satisfied versus Nicky definitely was not.
Yep, and as we kind of get to the end here, I've sent out the invite to get Tom in for trivia. So we're kind of whittling down here, but that rivalry, because I did a lot of racing when I was a kid in both karts and micro sprints, and throughout I made a lot of good friendships back then. And yeah, we may have roughed each other up on the track. We may have been really pissed at each other after races, but after a few minutes, you do have a bonding experience with these drivers that you're out there competing against. Because in the end, better competition makes you better.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, that's what a good rivalry does, and like that's why I said that. I absolutely just why it sticks out so much. Oh my goodness, we're getting crashed.
I have brought wrath upon this podcast.
You've
How's it going?
got a pretty good beer going there, Tom.
I'm doing good, just looking spooky in my poorly lit room.
I was about to say the lighting is pretty sweet.
Dynamic. I'm pretty excited for this because I was supposed to face Jesus this this Sunday on Fan Friction.
I know. Oh, I'm so mad about that.
Fine, because now we still get to compete, but you're probably going to win because I know nothing about cars.
Oh my God, I know nothing about cars. This is
Or
going to
this
be
movie.
great. This could be very even.
Okay, I'm excited.
All right, so now Curly gets to watch in the background is you two squirm.
Am I allowed to answer if they both give up?
Sure.
Absolutely. I'll
All
give.
right.
But Tom has to give you a model of a car.
So yes, like Tom referred to, if you get all 5 questions right, I will send a die-cast car. Or at this point, since it is looking pretty grim of that, whoever, when I decide to close out the season, has the highest score, will get a die-cast car of whatever I feel like sending.
All
Okay,
right.
so we'll start with Tom. We'll start with Tom since he's stepped up. I'm gonna try and find a good question for you because I know Curly brought this one up, so this will be a paying attention question. So pretty much a theme here on this show. How many cylinders did the Ferrari that Niki Lauda drove have?
It was a V8, right?
What's the field drove a V8, but he drove, what was it, Curly?
He drove a Ferrari Flat 12. Flat 12 that eventually made its way into the Ferrari Testarossa road car.
Which, to connect to another movie and TV show, Miami Vice.
Yep.
Oh.
Not the exact same engine, but sort of a variant of it. But yes, Flat 12, 3 liters, 500 horsepower.
All right, so now we'll move on to DeVaughn. We're gonna throw out an easy one for you. How many F1 titles does James Hunt have?
He just has 1. Correct?
Yep, he did in fact only win 1.
Hey.
Okay, so I'm going to give Tom a chance here on the second question. Based off the first one, how many cylinders did Hunt's McLaren have?
A V8.
Yeah, I try to keep your morale up a little bit.
Did I get it right?
Yes, you did.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah.
Cosworth DFV, 3 liter. DFV stands for dual cam 4 valve.
Down to, right, okay, 4 valve.
Yep.
All right, so DeVaughn, next question. This will be a movie-related question. What famous car movie, directed by George Lucas, did Ron Howard act in?
Oh, man. Are you sure Ron Howard wasn't pod racing? Did Lucas make any other films?
I know the answer.
I got nothing. Like, I couldn't name another Lucas film besides Star Wars, so I got nothing.
Wait, you can't even... Indiana Jones? Holy crap!
Don't tell other movie people. I haven't seen a single Indiana Jones movie.
Wow.
Or American
I'm gonna give you a point if you can get it.
I will say it's probably not Crystal Skull. I'll say it's Temple of Doom.
It is not. Tom, do you know the answer?
American Graffiti.
It is American Graffiti. I'm giving
And
Tom
I said it to Deezus like 5 seconds ago.
Oh, I did. It shows how much I'm paying attention. Yeah, no. Like I said, I forget George Lucas has done other things. I know the Star of Wars, that stuff.
It's actually a really interesting movie. I have no idea what was actually going on plot-wise, but there were a lot of sweet cars and sweet exhaust systems, so I was very much entertained, and some sweet 50s music.
Oh.
Okay, so Tom has now gotten 2 out of 3, since I'm giving him an extra point because this is my show. So we'll move on to DeVaughn for a couple questions in a row, actually. So this is based on the film, so hopefully you'll be able to get it. What place did James Hunt finish in that final race of Japan?
The final race?
Yep.
He placed 3rd.
fact place third.
Hmm?
He did, in fact, place third.
Sweet. Okay, that's what I thought. Sweet.
You both are doing well. 2 for 3 so far. All right, so now we're gonna have to get difficult here.
Yeah, this is where I start.
We're gonna go with Tom next, and this is going to be an either/or question. Which car manufacturer has a road car with a higher top speed? McLaren or Ferrari?
McLaren.
Curly, would you like to elaborate on which car?
Oh, how could I not? It's the McLaren F1, the fastest car in the world for a decade.
And still the fastest naturally aspirated car.
Also, just the best car.
I knew that one. I played a lot of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2.
Fun fact, I love that game.
It's a great game.
It's the last Need for Speed game I actually liked. Okay, DeVaughn. So, this one is a little more difficult than the Hunt one. How many F1 titles does Niki Lauda have?
Total?
Total.
So not just the movie. We're talking in general.
Correct.
I did research this. I believe he has 3.
Good show. He does, in fact, have 3. He did refer to it at the end of the movie, I believe, where he said he became a world champion again.
Mhm.
And, of course, he had the world championship. So you could infer it. But
Wasn't it like 5 years later, Curly? On that?
So he won, I think he won it in 1977 with Ferrari. Then he left Ferrari, went to Brabham for a couple years, drove the fan car. And then he retired for a couple years. Then he unretired, and he won his 3rd championship with McLaren in the 80s. And then he retired again.
Yep. So,
And
yeah,
now
it was a year later.
And now he sells ad space on his baseball cap. That's a true story, by the way. Your name here.
Okay, so Tom, next. So, like Curly actually mentioned this earlier in trivia, so you should be able to get this one. McLaren and most of the field was using an engine made by what British tuning company?
Tuning company? Oh, I can't name you a British company. BBC, that's all I got. No,
Try to remember what he said.
try to remember what he said. Who? Curly?
Yes.
Yeah.
Curly's like a storm, man. I try to pick things out before he says. I don't know, man. I got nothing.
It's the one that
Curly?
starts with a C, right?
Cadillac.
Cosworth!
Cogsworth. Oh, I thought you were referencing Beauty and the Beast. That's really what I know about.
Any British people should be really offended because Cogsworth was French.
Yeah, that doesn't explain why Emily Watson is Belle in the new movie, though.
Anyway, so DeVaughn, last question. And I believe you're already I actually had 3 out of 5, so if you get this right, you will be our leader for the season so far.
Hey.
All right, so this is going to be in reference to the movie, too. Other than Hunt, according to the film, what other driver was McLaren considering when Fittipaldi left?
They were considering Jackie X.
Correct. That was, in fact, Jackie X.
So 4 out of 5? Hey, I'll take that.
4 out of 5. And I've got a few more questions. So I'm just going to throw them at Curly, or like a fire towards the end, because I didn't write these questions for nothing.
Bring it.
All right. How many Constructors' Championships does Ferrari have?
Oh, right now? Oh, man. I want to say they've got 12.
Just a bit outside. 16.
I knew it was in the double digits.
What was James Hunt's highest championship position other than his title win?
I believe he finished. I think he finished second the next year in '77.
Nope, he was fifth. But the year
Fifth?
before, he got fourth in for Hesketh.
Okay, I knew the fourth in Hesketh. Thought he finished second the next year.
All right, so I think that's enough of that. So
I have a
see
trivia
guys,
question for you.
what trivia is hard for everyone? Oh,
I have trivia for you. Besides Chris Hemsworth and Natalie Dormer, what is the connection between Rush and the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Daniel Bruhl was the bad guy in Civil War.
Him too. Besides that,
Yeah, I was about to say. I was like,
come on, it's a car thing. It's not an actor thing.
it's a car thing.
I'll just tell you because I don't think you'll get it. So Iron Man 2, a Monaco race. The number 5 Ferrari is in both movies. It's in Iron Man and in Rush. So fun fact.
Yes, it is. I think the 6-wheel car also shows up in that movie too, but I haven't actually seen Iron Man 2 and, Wikipedia, so. We're pretty sure the P-34 was in there too.
All right, so just to finish it up here, we'll go around the horn. Tom, anything you'd like, since you stepped up, anything you'd like to plug, and where can we find you?
You can find me at our channel, Odd Shape Channel. We are also on a website called oddshapechannel.com. Our next show is tomorrow, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're talking sidekicks. We're talking who's the best non-human sidekick, what figure in history would you want to be your sidekick? You have to choose. Which sidekick would you want to see take a villainous turn? And we got another good one. And so we're going to be discussing them with a bunch of good people at 9 p.m. We run until 12 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 hours of good, solid sidekick discussion. Is it too much? Maybe. But tweet at me at OddShapePanel.
All right. So, DeVaughn, anything you'd like to plug? What's going on? Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Deezus12. That's where I'm at usually. But you can catch a couple of my podcasts. I got Deezus Take the Reel. That has its own Twitter handle at DeezusTTReel. But basically talking movies, just listen to the intro. Tom covered it perfectly. What happens in Deezus Take the Reel. Talk movies and life and a lot of weird shit in between. And then I just released a new podcast through Geek Pulse Radio called Beyond the Grave. It is a horror podcast just in time for the fall and Halloween season. And it's a horror variety show. We got skits in there. There's reviews. There's all sorts of really random fun stuff that I'm going to throw in there. So check those 2 podcasts out. And then you can check my website out, Deezus.org. It has all my articles I've written for Geeks and Gamers. It has personal articles, has pretty much everything. So Deezus.org, go check it out.
And I included a link of Deezus Take the Reel, a website for that in the description. So be sure to go check that out. And Curly, thank you for joining us once again. Where can people find you?
You're welcome. You will not find me on YouTube. I'm not a podcaster. Though with the success of these, I'm kind of considering it, but I have no idea what I talk about. Instead, I write. I write on MotoIQ.com, right here. I mostly write about car stuff. Of course, it's a car website. It's all sort of tech-related or occasionally race coverage. I actually just had an article go up. It's a re-release, remix, if you will, about how to plug a tire when you're stuck on the side of the road because I wrote it up once. I had a flat tire a long time ago, and the pictures were terrible because I didn't actually mean to write it up. I just took pictures. And then I got 2 flat tires in 2 months, and I took new pictures and wrote it up properly. So that just went up. If you somehow are a fan of MotoIQ and stumbled here, I did promise there will be more Project Viacross. There will be more Project Viacross. In fact, yesterday I got new brake parts for it. So when you're spending a couple of weekends in the garage getting dirty. And outside of MotoIQ, you can find me on Instagram where I usually take a lot of pictures of cars and occasionally guitars and occasionally my cat who made a brief appearance at the very beginning of this podcast. And that Instagram is Ragged Budget Racing, all one word.
All right. And And you can find me on Twitter at RoadRaider3 and doing this show every once in a while. We're going to start doing it on a more consistent basis. So go ahead, like, subscribe, do all the other YouTube things, what everyone else says. And so I wanted to once again thank you all for joining. Thank you, Tom, for showing up and calling in for the trivia. And we'll see you guys next week, where I'll be talking with TJ Dex about a hilarious movie that he actually turned me on to called The Wraith, which features a young Charlie Sheen. It's pretty fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I'll probably be posting about it all week. It's a fantastic piece of 80s cheese, plenty of old 80s concept cars and old 80s cars, 80s music. It's so great.
That's on my Netflix list, so now I'm definitely gonna check it out this week.
Do it. It's fantastic. And so since we all have racing to watch later today, so me and Curly specifically, we're going to cut it off. So have a nice day, everyone.